Dobry Tuberovsky. Well, the question for today, and no doubt for many days to come, is Egypt a failed society, despite the promise of the Arab Spring? Well, first of all, the Arab Spring is positive proof that the Middle East can find its own way to democracy, or the promise of it, quite well enough without the guiding hand of the West, its armies, or nation-building advisors. Just as the so-called Velvet Revolutions of Eastern Europe in 1989 owed nothing, and I mean nothing, to Ronald Reagan and his macho posturing with Star Wars defense shields or subsidized death squads in Central America, so the eruption of the mass democracy in Egypt and around the region owes nothing to the Anglo-American War on Terror, the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, or the corrupt, authoritarian, pre-Castro Middle Eastern version of Cuba now being built in Baghdad. That, of course, will not stop the West from trying to cash in on the Arab Spring of 2011. Symptomatic of this is the nonsense piece that appeared in Time magazine in the August 22nd issue. Right here, specifically in the feature article titled, as you can see, Seeking Growth After the Arab Spring by Michael Schumann, and yes, I'll mention his name, let him see this video, I couldn't care less, of Times Cairo Bureau. What a nice old colonial sound that has, with the subtitle reading, Unless it can nurture entrepreneurs and create jobs, the popular movement that toppled the dictators won't make a difference in real lives. Well, this is just ideological supposition masquerading as journalism, a typical example of how the corporate American media is as full of unmitigated bullshit as the old Soviet Pravda ever could be. What this writer is saying is that it's time for American-led globalization to move in on this region, remove the old state structures and state-run economies, and create a business corporate-friendly political and economic system. To do so, they want to cultivate entrepreneurs as the opening wedge. The same claptrap we heard 20 years ago of how stimulating a native entrepreneur class in Warsaw or Prague or Moscow was going to create a cornucopia of blessing whose golden rain would shower upon all. Maybe unequally, but inequality is, of course, one of the many blessings of Western democracy. Americans can seriously peddle such nonsense because they haven't the faintest notion of what real democracy is. Democracy originated as an attack on privilege, but the true American genius has been to invert it by the nostrum that the rich and poor have equal rights under the law, regardless of their unequal ability to contribute to the lawmakers, and that as a minority the wealthy and their property deserve special protection from the tyranny of the majority. Elsewhere, as in South Africa, capitalism was content to build on older feudal social bases for reasons of security and stability, but the peculiar genius of the new rich class of the U.S. has always been to pose as the underdogs and justify stealing the commonwealth of society as their protected right. This is the county fair snake oil Mr. Schumann now peddles to the people of Egypt. So let's look at the examples of entrepreneurship he gives. One is of a bookseller, the other a cafeteria proprietor. These kinds of people are allegedly the vanguard of social and political and economic liberation in born-again Egypt. Well, a closer look at his examples reveals this to be, as the Brits would say, utter bollocks. If you look at the photo of the ladies' bookshop, which I'll put up here, if you can make anything out of that, you can see that none of the titles are Arabic. I see only French, targeting, in Schumann's own words, wealthy Egyptians in a hip bookshop. The second, the cafeteria owner, which you might be able to glimpse here, dishes out beef bourguignon and chef salads to clients like Procter & Gamble. Okay, well, Schumann's very examples show up his thesis as the ideologically driven leftovers they are, because this kind of entrepreneurship is parasitical. These people don't produce anything themselves, nor do they buy or sell Egyptian-made products. It's merely trading in goods produced elsewhere, serving a very narrow clientele of native elites or foreign corporate interests, just upscale shoeshine boys. This is emphatically not the kind of role model an impoverished mass society like Egypt needs. 80% of Egypt's 81 million people live on 20% of its land along the Nile Delta, because only that 20% of the country's land surface is naturally life-sustaining. That's been true since humans first appeared on the Nile Delta in North Africa and remains so despite land reclamation projects of the last century. The average Egyptian was, for millennia, a fellahin, working a village plot for landlords, latterly a sharecropper picking cotton for the global market, until Nasser's revolution transferred him to the cities for proletarian purposes. Their old rural economy has gone, but the new urban economy cannot provide opportunity for the crowded urban masses who continue to breed for reasons of religion and prestige, just like they're still in the old village down home upon the Nile River. These kinds of entrepreneurs Sherman holds up as models have nothing to offer this impoverished mass because they do not and cannot provide economic opportunity for anyone but themselves or their families. These small businesses are as nepotistic and cronyist as any insider bureaucrats because providing for one's own is seen as one's first and foremost social duty. The notion of creating jobs for the many out of this kind of economic structure is a bit of industrial era rhetoric ladled out for political reasons that have no bearing on how a neoliberal economy works in the real blood fields of the global marketplace. Schuman himself lets the cat out of the bag further into this piece when he writes, and I quote, "Now the Middle East must jump into the globalization game. It must remove its old bureaucratic structures that hinder the free flow of foreign capital investment, allow this investment to turn its population into even lower wage labor to compete with Asia in making iPhones. Even has the boneheaded gall to hold up Dubai as an example of success. For Egypt, Dubai is a financial economy with a small native population, no hereditary mass laboring class that has to import its street sweepers and garbage collectors from the Philippines or Pakistan. This example is of a kind with this author's ideological shilling for corporate expansion in the name of free market entrepreneurship. It's also nonsense because, as economists like Ha-Joon Chang of the Faculty of Economics at Cambridge in the UK, or Eric Reinert, technology professor at the University of Tartu, Estonia, have shown that Western economies developed not through open doors of foreign capital and a self-regulating market, but through protectionism, government intervention and subsidy, and strategic investment, because they could not afford the luxury of free trade. Schuman's insistence on showing service-oriented entrepreneurs dealing in foreign-made luxuries merely underscores this point. The preconditions for wealth are to control one's own resources, production, land, labor, and distribution. This is the exact opposite of what the likes of Schuman advocate. Egypt will not and cannot build something for itself on his kind of neoliberal foundation. With the developed countries hogging patent rights from the public domain, forcing places like Egypt to accept an already developed economic model, it's just the old colonialism duded up in newer fashions. The ladder for capitalist development was kicked away for the likes of Egypt long ago to crawl out of poverty. A new model is necessary, one that emphasizes domestic production for domestic consumption, with foreign inputs kept at an auxiliary minimum. But all this might be merely begging the question, is Egypt itself any longer kind of viable human society? Has it reached the end of the road in its human potential, given its great disparities not only in wealth, but in population, in its habitable land, food, and water? Is the world's oldest continuous civilization showing us our own future down the road? These are the hard questions that need tackling, not bullshit nostrums peddled by corporate advertisers. On the backside of the article's lead page, by the way, we find, if I can locate it again, surprise, surprise, a full-page ad for T. Rowe Price. 100% of our retirement funds, etc. These are the kinds of people offering development advice to Egypt. Schuman goes on to quote a young Egyptian businessman that with the advent of democracy, if you do something for your country, it will deliver results. This was totally not there, meaning before in the Mubarak era. Unasked, of course, is what are these results exactly, to whom the results are delivered, or what kind of democracy Egypt actually has at the moment. If the past is any predictor of the future, this means essentially turning Egypt into a national shoeshine boy for the Western-based global capitalist economy. Hello. Who? Adam Smith, author of The Wealth of Nations. What you been up to? I'm wrestling with Karl Marx, huh? He just wanted to say that author Schuman is just following the advice you gave centuries ago in laying the foundations for a prosperous realm. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, don't worry. The new global market economy will ensure they can't even do that.